Welcome down to my 9-foot homemade oak bar. Pour yourself a cold one. You are listening to Bucks in the Basement. My name's Chris, and Craig here is the biggest Pirates fan you'll ever meet. Let's talk Pirates baseball now. Welcome to Bucks in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
Many of you may be thinking that Chris has abandoned me. I haven't heard from Chris in a while. He will be back very soon. He had a daughter that was graduating, had to go register for classes at the University of Illinois, has another kiddo, into high school, another young one that he's probably chasing around at every field that he can get to at this point in time. So I've brought in another guest, a gentleman who, once you see his face, may need no introduction. He's a graduate of Duquesne University School of Journalism, has written upwards of almost 40 books at this point in time on Pittsburgh sports, Western Pennsylvania sports history, from the Pirates to the Penguins to the Steelers to the Duquesne Dukes. I was looking on your website, the 2166 books, and you have one coming out on the broadcasters. You have a golf one coming out, a boxing one coming out. I mean, you are covering everything in Western Pennsylvania. Specifically, the books on the Pirates. You have the Pittsburgh Pirates Encyclopedia, volumes 1 and 2, Classic Bucks, the 50 greatest games in Pittsburgh Pirates history, the 50 greatest players in Pittsburgh Pirates history. I've seen you over on Oneberg. You've done the Finoli-and Fletch show, the Sports and that. Recently interviewed and spoke with Josh Gibson's great grandson, Sean Gibson, and the great work they do there with that foundation. David Finoli. What did I miss, David? And when do you sleep? And how are you doing, sir?
Well, I'm doing fine. Sleep is overrated. There'll be some times I'm sitting here doing research on a book, thinking it's like 10:30 at night, and I get so lost in the research, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning that I look up. But I'm doing great. Enjoying a little soccer and a little baseball at the same time in the office.
There's nothing wrong with that. I told my wife and my youngest, I said, I'm going to go down and talk baseball for a little while because they don't really have the same passion that I do. Well, one's 7 years old, and he's into video games and swimming with his friends because it's summertime. My wife is a White Sox fan, so we talk some White Sox history with her, but not so much Pirates history. But the one thing I wanted to get into here is with your writing of history, we have another possible history-making player in Andrew McCutchen. Andrew McCutchen, 37 years old. I was not sure that the signing would go as well as it did this second time around due to the injury. But McCutchen, over his last 30 games, slashing .287, .365, .467, 2 home runs. He has a .739 OPS, leading the team with Brian Reynolds in home runs on the season. And I had another Pittsburgh Pirate just kind of come right into my head. Was a little bit before my time. I was probably bouncing on somebody's knee at that point in time. And I can't help but thinking of Willie Stargell and the stories I've heard about him and how I can kind of put those two things together, which, like, Father Time is undefeated, but for both of those guys, they're trying to fight Father Time, and they did, in Willie's case, as hard as he could.
Oh, absolutely. When Willie had his spectacular '79 season late in his career, just a couple years earlier, we thought his career was over. He had a pinched nerve in the neck, other assorted injuries, had struggled, and then out of the blue in '78, he hits 28 homers, wins the Comeback Player of the Year award, and '79. I mean, that was my freshman year at Duquesne. And I almost flunked out that first semester because I was at the stadium just about every night watching the pennant race up close. And I'll tell you what, it was a miraculous season for the ages when 39-year-old players weren't hitting 50 and 60 homers as they did during the steroid era. But it was magnificent. And Stargell, on top of being such a great power hitter, was a leader beyond compare. One of the great leaders in Pirate history, probably the greatest leader of my lifetime. And that part of him should get more play than it does, because that's what made him so great, the combination of the two.
And it kind of seems like that McCutchen has, I think that, the last time around he was a little bit younger. And it's been talked about that in the clubhouse, he wasn't that leader. There was other guys that had a little bit more experience, like an AJ Burnett, Francisco Liriano, that were kind of pushing that type of stuff. But it definitely seems like that he has taken that leadership role. He is kind of accepting the fact that he's gotten older, and although he is still performing, he's realizing that he has, it's so much more to give to not only the city, but also this team. And it's very exciting to watch because, he still plays the game like a kid. He was on the bases the other day. The ball got thrown over, and he did this like little dance around the base and got this big smile on his face. Like, I don't have that many stolen bases this year, guys. I'm not the threat that I used to be, but he was still going to have fun with it.
Absolutely. I never thought he was a rah-rah type leader at his first go-round, but he had arguably one of the great 3-year runs in Pirate history. I compare it with Kai Kyler's run and certainly Barry Bonds' run in the early 90s, where he should have won all 3 MVPs because Terry Pendleton was not the player he was in 1991. But, it was an incredible run. He picked up a franchise that had lost 20 years in a row. Hell, it's easier to win a World Series than to lose 20 years in a row like they did. And for that, Pittsburgh should always be grateful to what he's given them. But from a playing standpoint, I did, and I'll tell you this, although I don't usually like to reveal ratings I have in books. But Cutch, I had him, and I did a book on the all-time Pirate All-Star team, and I did rate him above Max Carey when it came to center fielders. I didn't think I was going to at the beginning, but when I compared his career at that point, which was before this second time around, to Carey versus the rest of the league at the time, he was superior. The only weakness he really had was his arm in center field. He was a great fielder, but didn't really have the arm strength that of an Andy Van Slyke for comparison. But he was a great player other than that. We can look at him with this, especially with this unexpected. I agree with you. It's an unexpected resurgence. And we can look at this as he can be considered, certainly in the top 20 all time of a franchise that, despite what we've done in the last 40 years, is still a classic historical franchise with such great players. And that's pretty impressive to be included in the top 15, top 20 all time.
Yeah, and you stole the question right out of my mouth, because I was going to say, where would you put him at? And if we're saying 15 or 20, and a lot of that stuff is what he did for the franchise, like you're saying, like, throwing them on his back and getting them back there. But then the stats and an MVP, season and different stuff that, we hadn't seen in Pittsburgh for years. I mean, I know that, we both have a little bit of gray in our beard here, is that, we stuck with this franchise, through those 20 years. When you're talking about being a freshman, watching the 1979 Pirates teams, I was a freshman in college watching the 1998 Pirate team. I was a senior in high school when the freak show happened. So I was at a lot of those games as well. But other than that, there was a lot of times where I think I went to the stadium one time, and it was against the Cleveland Indians at the time, the Guardians now, right after they had started doing the interleague play and stuff. And I went on a Friday night and we lost. I think it was like 18-2. So I'm like, okay, I'll go back on Saturday. And they lost like 19-1. And I'm like, well, they can't lose this bad on Sunday. And then it was like a 15-5 game on Sunday. So, I mean, there was, a lot of bad years there. And Cutch, did that for the Pirates. But now, like, as we sit here, the Pirates are 36-38, 2 games under 500, in the midst of a hunt in the Central as well as the wild card. And my question for everybody that I've kind of brought on as a guest here in Chris's absence, David, is, did you have like some expectations for the Pirates this season? Was there a projection that you had in mind? Or did you go into this thinking, okay, I've been through year 5 of a rebuild before. I kind of know what to expect, because year 5 of the Pirates' last rebuild was 2012. And it was a good team that had another epic collapse like they did in 2011. So what were your thoughts kind of going into this Pirates season?
Well, I had projected them at 82 or 83 wins. I thought it was a better team than last year. While we've been disappointing offensively, you look down man to man at this point, especially with Cruz coming back. It talent-wise, probably a better offensive lineup that's just starting to break out of things a little. But where I base mine on, I'm a huge Ben Cherington fan. We've never tried to build a team on pitching before. I mean, it's 70s, 60s. It was a great hitting team. The last time pitching was the strength, like a super strength of this team, was in the early 1900s, 1900 to 1908, when Sam Lever, Deacon Felipe, you had Vic Willis in there. A lot of guys who were among the best pitchers in the league at the time, and that was the strength of those teams. Babe Adams starting out in 1909 and becoming, in my estimation, the greatest pitcher in Pirate history and a borderline Hall of Fame candidate. But right now, Ben Cherington has put together arms first. And if you can hold the team to fewer than 4 runs a game with a starting rotation like that, you're in just about every game. I mean, history shows us that teams with bad pitching staffs who maybe score 6-7 runs a game inevitably never get past much over 500 at best. So right now, Paul Skeens, who looks to me at this point potentially the greatest modern pitcher we've had. We've never had somebody with the potential to be so dominant. Now he has to prove it more than 8 games. Jared Jones, who I thought would be good but not this quick, gives you another solid number 2 and potentially a number 1 guy down the road. Keller, who's a strong number 2 guy, right now is number 3. I mean, before you were forcing number 5 and 6 guys as your number 1 pitcher. And this makes a huge difference. Braxton Ashcroft, who had Tommy John surgery and has just been spectacular over the last 2 years, looks to be the next in line who could jump up here. Bubba Chandler struggled a little bit in Altoona, but quite frankly, he has the stuff that of a number one pitcher. He probably has potentially the best number one or the number one fastball in the system right now. Anthony Solomedo, who again is struggling a little bit. He's given up a few extra home runs this year than he normally has, but again, there's potential for him. So, rather than having that one guy who might be 2 or 3 levels down and we're waiting for, you just are plugging in time after time. And let's not forget Quint Priester, who I thought was pitching well before his injury, who, if he's your number 5 guy, you're sitting pretty.
Yeah. I mean, you what you just said, I mean, is hard to deny. I mean, pretty much one of the hardest things in baseball to do is to put together a rotation with, the limited money to a degree, because we're never going to go out and spend, those $30 million contracts. We're not going to do it that way. And yeah, you could, as they did in the early 2010s, is, kind of get guys that, some teams wanted to get rid of in AJ Burnett and get rid of some of his contract. And then, Francisco Liriano having a little bit of a resurgence, which we've seen, over the past few seasons with, players, and finding a possibly a diamond in the rough in Bailey Falter, because, Philadelphia was done with him, even though I've said on this program, numerous times, Chris and I always go by whip, and his whip, 2 years ago in Philadelphia was below a 1.3, which anybody that's below a 1.3 has the ability to be, a 4 or a 5 in the rotation or above, depending on how low you go down. So, I mean, they've kind of, taken away the hard part, and the offense is kind of starting to heat up as the months get hotter here, spending a lot of time either in the pool or outside at this point in time, because my goodness, is it hot. And the thing that I looked at here is the Pirates' pace. And when I talk about pace, is like, what pace are they on for? Because people are saying, like you said, David, going to like the 82, 83 wins. I had them between 78 and 82 as like the highest. I was looking at like around a 500 team. And I look back to May 10th, because a lot of people look, that's when, Nick Gonzalez came up. That's the day before Paul Skeens made his debut. And they were basically, not sitting so great at that point in time. They were 6 games under 500. They've gone 19-17 since that point. If they keep up that same pace, they will have 82 wins. From June 1st to now, depending on when you're listening to this, we're recording this on Thursday night, they're 10-7 in the month of June. If they keep up that pace, they have 87 wins. So I know it kind of seems like an overwhelming type of thing when people, start to have to throw out like the number of wins you have to get to 87 wins. When you say they have to win, when you're saying like 50 games or something or to get there, you know what I mean? It sounds like an overwhelming number, but when you kind of break it down into sections, because I mean, if you look at it, a Major League Baseball season is broken out in sections. You start the season when it's freezing and snowing on opening day, to the point where like I'm wearing a tassel cap and a hoodie, to now. I mean, it does get broken out into that. And it's also teams that have the depth, to get through that. And like I said, the hitting has come along. In the month of June, they are a top half team in OPS and also close to that in WRC plus, if anybody's in like the Fangraph statistics. The pitching, the starting pitching has continued to excel. The bullpen is kind of where things have, fallen apart to a degree, but they're starting to pull that even together in this month. And for me, like we've said this since the beginning of this program, this is our 5th year, quote unquote, covering the Pirates as fans. The bullpen is kind of the last thing that has to come together. And I know that like a lot of people don't agree with Ben Cherington's method of just grabbing guys off the waiver wire and kind of seeing who sticks and then rotating through that. Well, I mean, right now he's got Bednar, Chapman, Holderman. Majinski's pitching pretty well. Kyle Nicholas is showing flashes. And you're trying to fill those, those last few spots in the rotation, which a lot of times for teams, I mean, we just played the Dodgers a few weeks ago, and we got to see Anthony Bonda and I think it was Johan Ramirez, two former Pirates who we threw onto the scrap heap, per se, pitching for one of the best teams in baseball. So, I mean, that was just a long kind of diatribe to say that, if the pace stays the same as it is right now, yeah, they might not jump up to that 98 wins that, we loved in 2015, but they might be right where their goal kind of was.
Yeah. I mean, in the bullpen, you look at it the last 2.5, 3 weeks, it's coming around. I mean, Bednar has been the Bednar. He was walking a few too many guys early on, but now that's come to an end. I mean, Chapman was walking over 1.5 people per inning for a while, and then I think he got irritated with himself, and now he's the Chapman of old. He's struck out at last check like something like 43 batters in 26 innings. So he's been a solid number 7 guy. Holderman has been unhittable. So the back end of your bullpen is what we thought it would be at the beginning of the year. You add to that Luis Ortiz, who the one thing I disagree with what they're doing, and Ortiz looked like he should be part of that rotation. If you're complaining that your bullpen's getting tired, doing 2 starter maneuvers in a 3-day period probably isn't your best move. I would have put Ortiz probably in the starting rotation at that point, but he has had a fabulous year. Falter, his only weakness is home runs. And that's always been, if you look down his high ERAs in the past, and you're right, WHIP to me, is the one sabermetric so-called stat that I put a lot of stock into, because that's telling you their history right there. How many men am I putting on per inning? He's always been solid there, but he gives up far too many home runs. And this year he's cut down on them, but you go back and look at the runs he's given up. That's where they're coming from. But he's been a great number 4 guy. Perez sounds like he's on his way back. He's been the epitome of a 5 guy. But if Ashcroft continues what he's done in his first 2 starts at Indianapolis, I plug him in there, and Perez can become your long guy out of the pen. Plus the bullpen, again, you've got some great arms down there that we haven't even mentioned. The Thomas Harrington. You can only have 5 guys in a rotation. A lot of these guys are going to be great parts of the bullpen. Nichols will probably be a great part of that bullpen once he gets his rhythm down, just like Majinski, who you're right, he's looked great as of late. I think the bullpen at this point is the least of their problems. Right now, you hope the lineup starts getting on fire a little. McCutchen has, Reynolds has, Gonzalez has been a great. So happy to see that. Such a natural hitter in the minors. Was considered the greatest college hitter coming out of the draft, and he's starting to show that. He reminds me of a Mike Greenwell. Not a guy who's going to hit you more than 22, 23 homers, but such great gap power when he's really hitting well. And if he can get you between 280 and 310, you got a great addition there. Cruz, boy, he can be frustrating at times, but when he gets a hold of it, man, he is just fun to watch. So the potential is there. Hayes is a potential 270 to 280 hitter who's just lost his way a little bit. So hopefully that'll turn around. But the outfield is a question mark. Sawinski, he goes through hot streaks, sure, and he has decent power, but he has so many unproductive at bats, so many strikeouts. I wish I could look down and say, hey, here's his replacement, but a guy like Lonnie White Jr. has been a huge bust so far this year in the minors. There's nothing really down there short of Palacios, and he's not a center fielder. So that is my concern. Bay is not a center fielder, and he's a slap hitter to boot. Not what you want at this point in time in this kind of era. So my concern is in the outfield.
Are you a fan of the Pittsburgh Pirates and supporting small businesses? If so, Bucks in the Basement has you covered. Introducing the Bucks in the Basement Vouch Store with products from places like Split Rock Coffee. Coffee with a purpose. Established, owned, and operated by disabled veterans, sworn to protect America. Or Camp Craft Cocktails. More than cocktails. It's a mission to build longer tables where everyone is welcome. We try and vouch for these products. Bucks in the Basement, proudly brought to you by Vouch. Visit our Vouch store at bucksinthebasement.com or simply click on the link in the show notes. To look to the outfield, I mean, if you think about it, back in the day, we had McCutchen in center field, Marte in left field. And as much as people like to, rip on his field a little bit, but I mean, Gregory Polanco was starting to turn into like a pretty good hitter himself. And like you said, right now, I mean, you're throwing, Joe out there, Olivares out there, at times. And it's not saying that Olivares, couldn't develop into something. He's still, I don't think he's been fully developed at the major leagues yet. Yeah. But the one that you mentioned right there is Henry Davis, just because the catching situation this year, mostly because of injuries, to a degree, has been a little bit disastrous. At times, they filled it with Joey Bart until he got hurt. Jason DeLay being back is a little bit of a boost to the team because I think he is an underrated defensive catcher, and a guy who, if he's just going to hit singles, I that's fine. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you don't need a big power hitter as your backup, catcher. But there definitely are some question marks, and that would be my thing. Is I had Ethan Fisher, the editor from Rum Bunner, on recently, and I would say, if you were going to add, it sounds like that you would be, trying to add somewhere in the outfield.
I think that would be their main concern. I don't like having 100 hitting catchers, but from what I gather with the front office, they look at more framing, how they handle the staff. Those are important. Don't get me wrong. It's just not the kind of lineup where you can hide a 100 hitter. And I'd be looking for catcher. I don't think they will, but they should be looking for outfielders. They should be looking for a boosted. Man, if you had a boost in this offense, 87, 88 wins isn't out of the question. But and you have some prospects you need to think about letting go. There's only so many rungs on the ladder, so to speak, that you can promote. And that's the thing about having such a good deep system, is get some of these guys and get some help now. Now's the time you can do it. You get in a playoff and you have something you haven't had ever since we've had playoffs. And quite frankly, I'm not sure since 1960. that you have pitchers in a short series that can dominate so much. And all of a sudden, if you're Pittsburgh, you don't want to play Pittsburgh in a short series.
Yeah. I can't disagree with you there. And in my eyes, I know that you're big into all Western Pennsylvania sports, and I kind of equate it to the fact of when a goalie gets on a heater in the playoffs, he can take control of the game, because there's teams that may just kind of sneak into the NHL playoffs. But if their goalie catches heat at the right time, and I mean, we've even seen it in the wild card playoff games for the Pirates. I mean, we ran into Madison Bumgarner and Jake Arrieta, who were just buzzsaws. Yeah. I mean, they were going to take us out, even if we scored. We'd have to score more than 2 runs, because, I mean, they weren't going to let us. So, but David, on our show here, we are 30 minutes of Bucks, and I'm going to have you back on, because
I'd love to.
This conversation could go on for till what time do you stay up till? Like sometimes 2-3 o'clock in the morning. I could easily do that. This is going to be a tough question here, and then I do want you to talk about your books that are coming soon.
Sure.
What is your favorite Pirates moment? And then also, what is your favorite Western PA sports moment? And you can give me a couple if you want to, because I know that would be kind of hard with everything that you've researched and also everything you've experienced.
Well, my favorite Pirate moment, and I was 11 at the time, but it's really what kind of spurred me from a baseball fan at that age to passionate about the game, was Game 7 of the 1971 series. Seeing your first World Championship. Earl Weaver trying to throw Steve Blass off his game by coming out and complaining about him pitching from the rubber properly, to try to throw him off his game. And Blass, who was struggling at the time, thanks Earl Weaver to this day for basically focusing him and pitching, save your no-hitters that we've seen. That was the most spectacular pitch game I've seen, because it was Game 7 for a world championship that nobody thought you could win. And I just always remember that so fondly, that group of players. Certainly Roberto became a hero to all of us in my age, that World Series, taking the team on his back and leading him there. The most spectacular 37-year-old athlete I had seen take away today's modern medicine that makes it a lot easier to be a 37-year-old athlete. Clemente didn't have that. And he was at the top of his game then. And, certainly my worst day as a Pittsburgh sports fan came a year later, on not long after the Steelers lost to the Dolphins in the 1972 AFC Championship, when later that evening, he dies in an accident, in what I always thought was a foolhardy mission, because if you think about it, he thought if he took those goods, Nicaragua had a horrific earthquake, and there was a civil war in Nicaragua at the time, where a group, the Sandinistas, were in charge, and the goods weren't getting to the people who needed them. Clemente thought if he went, he could be the one to get them to the people that went there. And I contend those people were ruthless, and I don't think would have cared that he was so beloved. And I don't know that he survives if the plane lands. But if you think about that, it just puts the bravery of Roberto Clemente on a whole nother level, and just puts him on another level. But that was my greatest moment. The Immaculate Reception. My dad was a season ticket holder to the Steelers, and took my brother and I there. My dad also hated traffic. And my dad, at the time, the Steelers were coming off a streak where they were the Pittsburgh Pirates of the NFL. For 40 years, they were an embarrassment. So after Kenny Stabler, who was slower than I am today, runs for a touchdown and goes up 7-6. He gets mad, looks at my brother and I, says, "Let's get the hell out of here. At least we'll beat traffic." So as we walk out on Gate C, Three River Stadium erupts. I don't know what the hell happens because the game's blacked out, of course. And until we get back to the car, we don't know. We just assume somehow Roy Girella kicks a field goal to win that game. And then the next day we finally see what the Immaculate Reception was, because back then all home games were blacked out and they were replayed on Sunday or on the next day. This was a Saturday game that was replayed Sunday. So until the day he died, my brother and I would just jerk around with him to no end. "Hey, Dad, remember when you took us to the Immaculate Reception and made us miss it?" And we'll have a good time with that. But obviously that was great. But my other great Pirate moment would be, strangely enough, in 2013. It was a tie. And the newspaper from that day still sits on my wall. 82, when they won their 82nd game against Texas. It was an emotional. I was coming home. I'm a manager at Kohl's, and I was coming home from work. Must have spent 2 hours on the phone with my cousin Tommy and just talking about the last 20 years. We both grew up in the 70s, and that was special. The next one was against the Cubs. The way the game ended to clinch the playoff spot. I got to tell you, I was one of the few times I got emotional at the end of a game, just to see where they had been, and all of a sudden they were back. And I was going to watch a playoff game at PNC Park, which I didn't think was imaginable at that time. At the first game, I had made a bet with my friend Bill Rainier, who I wrote the Pirate Encyclopedia and a couple other books with. I said, I hate sushi. Thought I'd hate sushi. I said, "I'll tell you what, Billy, if they make a playoff at PNC Park, I will eat sushi." And I pointed to the place that served sushi. Well, he remembered 13 years later. And I tried sushi, and it was every bit as disgusting as I thought it'd be. But that atmosphere and that moment was the third, tied for the second greatest moment, all from that year, at that wild card game. One of the great experiences in sports I've ever had, like a college atmosphere. And, that will go down, even though they petered out in the next round. That will go down as one of my favorite years. And I've been watching Pirate baseball since '68.
Yeah, I can't argue with anything that went along in 13. And I as everybody knows, you have written so many books. You have a bunch of them coming out. Some that I had mentioned. You have one coming out on, I believe it's on the Pittsburgh Broadcasters. You have one coming out. I think it was on. You got a boxing. I didn't know what that one was. So tell me about your books that are coming out here pretty soon.
Well, we actually within the next 6 months we'll release 4 books. First one, I also design books for the 2166 website, and a guy I use him as my boxing author on some of the books on Pittsburgh sports, like Where Pittsburgh Played, which had some boxing in it, and some of the others. His name is Douglas Kavanaugh, probably the greatest boxing historian I've ever come across, and he has written a 2-volume book on the history of boxing in Pittsburgh, which in the 40s and 50s and 30s were among the greatest boxing towns in the country. And the first book was on the fighters. This book is on the great fights that has happened in Pittsburgh or was involved with Pittsburgh fighters, and just a phenomenal book. It'll release on June 25th. It's called Pittsburgh Boxing: A Collective History by Douglas Kavanaugh. You can find it on my website, which is 21-66books.com, and that'll be out first. Then I've combined with Tom Rooney, former president of the Penguins and member of the Rooney family, Chris Fletcher, the former publisher of Pittsburgh Magazine, and an interesting guy who is the official historian at Oakmont named David Moore. We wrote a book that is going to celebrate every major championship ever done in Pittsburgh. It includes the U.S. Amateur, U.S. Opens, Women's Opens, PGAs, Women's Amateurs, anything that is a USGA major or a major championship. It'll be a very exhaustive 350 plus page book. And I have had so much fun with the research on that because I love golf. In fact, going through this heat wave reminds me when I attended the 94 Oakmont playoff in 95-degree weather with humidity, where the guys were so overheated, especially Colin Montgomery, who had as white a complexion as I've ever seen, was beat red by the time that round was over. Ernie Els, of course, winning. But that'll be out in September. Chris and I are doing a book that we're going to release at the Josh Gibson Foundation Gala on October 17th called the Steel City 100, which will rank the top 100 athletes in Western Pennsylvania history. Then the third book will be released in time for opening day of 2024-25 season. If you're a Duquesne alum, you finally figured out what the Red Sox faithful felt like in 2004. 2 years before I went to Duquesne, they went to the tournament in '77, and we were building back in the 50s and 40s and 30s. Duquesne was a powerhouse. They were a Duke when it came to being a powerhouse of college basketball. So much that through 47 years of losing, there's still 300 games over 500 in their all-time record. But for 47 years, in '81, they were close. We thought it's going to happen. New administration took over, destroyed the program, and for 47 years, we suffered. We never thought it would happen. I mentioned I got emotional at the 2013 Cup game. There were tears flowing when we defeated VCU after 47 years of waiting for just an NCAA bid from a special team that was 0-5 in the conference and looking like this was going to be the most disappointing of all seasons. And it ended up being the first time they won 25 games since they won the national championship in 1955. And that's going to be called 47 years, the story of the 23-24 Duquesne Dukes championship run. That'll be released in November in time for the opening day. And then the last one we're releasing, Chris works for the Ryan Shazier Foundation, and they're having a gala that's going to honor Pittsburgh broadcasters. So we're writing a book that's going to honor every prominent Pittsburgh play-by-play guy, talk show host, anchorman. We've had so many. Dick Stockton, who is the voice of the NBA. Not many people realize he got his start basically at KDK in Pittsburgh and was a Steeler announcer. Ray Scott, the great CBS voice and Packer voice, got his start here in Pittsburgh. So this book is called Behind the Mic. It'll be released in January at the Ryan Shazier Gala. And that's going to be the 5 books that we have at 2166 coming out. And we have a whole slew that 2025 will bring that we have in conversation too. And some will be released in conjunction with Oneberg and our friend Brian Carruthers.
Well, I told you before we hopped on here that I had a book idea for you, and
Okay.
it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and it is the coal mining baseball leagues. My grandfather was a pitcher for 8 years in the coal mining baseball leagues. Played everywhere from Leechburg to Avamore to Vanagrift down to Pittsburgh, and his most favorite memory that he told me about one time is he worked all day and went and threw back-to-back no-hitters against an arch rival from Avamore. But even bigger than that, they were the coal mining leagues were some of the teams that would play the Homestead teams, that they would play the Keller Giants when they came in. They would play these other teams, and sometimes the coal miners didn't have enough players. So they would get to play on the same teams as some of the great Negro League
That'd be an honor.
players.
That'd be an honor.
So that's one that that I think that I'm not the most resourceful and not good on research and stuff like that. But there's pictures that my grandma had of my pap playing baseball. So that's my one of my challenges to you is to write one on the old coal mining baseball leagues. So
yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that. That actually ended up. I did a book called The History of Baseball in Altoona, basically because I was intrigued. They had a major league team there in the 1800s in the Union Association for like 32 days before it got moved out. So, and they had a railroad league, which was similar to the coal mining leagues, and all the industries, and they would recruit all these industries, the coal miners, the railroad would recruit workers who were great baseball players.
Yeah.
And these would be as well attended as minor league, and they had the talent of professional players. They were very well played leagues. In fact, the coal miner league around here also would sponsor soccer teams. And in Pittsburgh, in the 20s through the 50s, we play now the Lamar Hunt Trophy, which back then was the U.S. Cup. And many of the U.S. Cup winners came from Pittsburgh, sponsored by coal manufacturers.
Yeah.
And they would tell similar stories to players working all day and then coming out and winning a national championship on a team where the lines were lined by coal. The field was lined by coal. So yeah, that is an interesting part of sports in this country that gets kind of passed by. But so many major league players came from these leagues, and it's just fascinating how these would be the top played miners in coal mines would be the baseball players, and that's how they would recruit them. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely a very cool thing. But once again, David, thank you so much for coming on here. It's been an absolute pleasure. Like I said, we'll definitely have to do it again. For those of you that don't, go check out, 2166 books, David's website. Check out some of the books.
66.
Yeah, 21-66, and check out some of the books there, and look forward to the books that are coming out. And like I said, we'll do this again very, very soon. This was a great pleasure.
Would love to. Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.